It was the kind of story that made people stare, point, and gossip. Two twins born to the same mother, with the same blood, the same heart, and yet they couldn't have been more different. One had dark skin, the other pale. It was as if the world had no tolerance for their differences, as if the universe had planned this twist just to make their lives harder. From the moment they were born, they were forced to face the cruelty of the world's judgment. Look at them. They don't even look like sisters. The taunts came daily, from children on the playground to adults at the grocery store. Are you sure they're even related? They'd ask with a laugh, but it cut deep. Every word a reminder that they were born into a world that didn't understand them and didn't want to. But it wasn't just the world that turned against them. At home, there were whispers too. Their mother, loving but vulnerable, tried to shield them from the storm of ridicule. But even she couldn't stop the hurt that followed them everywhere. How could she? No one was ever ready for such a cruel twist of fate. In the face of all this pain, the twins had to fight to stay strong. To each other, they were everything. Their bond was unbreakable. Even when the world made them feel like they didn't belong, they found comfort in the love and warmth they shared between them. But the world wasn't so kind. It was a storm that seemed to never end. Every time they tried to get ahead, to walk tall and proud, the weight of people's words crushed them. They saw no way out. They were just two girls in a world that seemed to have no place for them, no understanding of what it felt like to love each other so deeply, but be torn apart by something as shallow as appearance. But this is not where the story ends. Because after all the pain, after the tears, after the heartache, one of them would rise higher than anyone could imagine, into the dizzying heights of success. And in that journey, she'd prove not just to herself, but to the world that no matter how different you are, you can still carve your own path to greatness. From the very beginning, the world saw the twins as a riddle it couldn't solve. They were born into a world that demanded conformity, a world that couldn't understand the beauty of their bond, of how two different souls could be tied so closely together. The innocence of their early years was quickly overshadowed by cruel mockery and harsh judgment. As they grew older, the twins began to realize how different they were. The laughter of their peers, the side glances from strangers, the whispers in the school halls, all of it was a constant reminder of how the world perceived them. Their innocence was their greatest strength, yet the world saw it as a weakness. They didn't understand why people treated them differently. They didn't understand why their very existence was seen as something to ridicule. One of the twins, the one with dark skin, bore the brunt of the cruel comments. People didn't even try to get to know her. They saw only her skin, her differences. The stares were piercing, their eyes full of judgment, not curiosity. She would go home from school with tears in her eyes, feeling like she wasn't enough, like the world had made her a mistake just by existing. Her sister, the pale twin, tried to shield her from the hurt. She always stood by her side, a protector, in the most innocent of ways, offering her love and warmth in a world that didn't seem to care. But even she couldn't stop the cruelty. The day they both heard a classmate say, "Why do you look like that? You don't even look like twins." It was as if the weight of the world had crushed their innocence. Their hearts broke that day, not because they didn't know how to defend themselves, but because they knew that no matter how hard they tried, they could never change the way people viewed them. Their mother, too, felt the pain. She did everything she could to protect her daughters, but it was an impossible task. She saw the look in their eyes, the quiet despair that settled deep in their souls. She saw the way they flinched when someone stared too long or made a rude comment. It hurt her to the core to see her children suffer. Yet, all she could do was hold them, hug them, and tell them that no matter what anyone said, they were beautiful. They were loved. But deep down, even she knew that words alone could never heal the pain they were enduring. At the playground, the other children would run and play. But the twins often found themselves sitting on the swings, alone. While others ran freely, they often sat in silence, staring at the world they couldn't quite fit into. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was a shared understanding. In their innocence, they realized that the world wasn't going to accept them for who they were. But their bond, their unwavering connection, was something that no one could take away. They would often talk about their dreams. The pale twin wanted to be a doctor, to heal others, while the dark-skinned twin wanted to be an artist, someone who could bring beauty to the world. In their dreams, the color of their skin didn't matter. They didn't see their differences. They saw only their potential. But the harsh world around them had already set boundaries they didn't even know existed. And yet, in those moments of shared silence, they had one another. They didn't need the world's approval, just the comfort of knowing they weren't alone in their struggles. That was enough for them, for a time. They were innocent, untainted by the world's judgment, but it was only a matter of time before the innocence they held so tightly to would be shattered. The moral awakening of the twins came in phases, like soft ripples slowly building into waves. The harshness of the world began to teach them lessons they weren't ready to learn, but it was those very lessons that would shape the women they would eventually become. As they entered their teenage years, the mocking didn't stop. Instead, it grew worse. The twins, once filled with boundless innocence and an open heart, began to feel the sting of the world's cruelty more profoundly. They didn't fully understand the complexities of race, privilege, or societal standards at the time. They only understood how people saw them, how they were treated, and the pain it caused. At first, they tried to fight it. The darker-skinned twin, in particular, developed a sharp defense mechanism. She would snap back at anyone who dared to question her, her words laced with anger. "I'm just as good as you," she would yell, her voice shaking with emotion. But no matter how loud she got, the bullying didn't stop. The world didn't change, and neither did the people who treated her like an outsider. She would go home each day exhausted, physically from the emotional weight and mentally from the constant battle. Her twin, the pale one on the other hand, started to withdraw into herself. She became quieter, less willing to engage with others, and she began to wonder if the world was right. She would look in the mirror and wonder, am I really different? Am I really not enough? The doubts crept in, eating away at her confidence. It wasn't the same kind of anger that her twin felt, but a quieter, deeper sense of inadequacy that settled in her heart. She, too, would try to deflect the negativity with humor or wit, but inside, she was losing a part of herself every time someone pointed out her differences. It was in these moments, when they were at their lowest, that the moral awakening began to stir within them. They were tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of defending themselves. Tired of trying to prove something to a world that didn't understand. It was in that exhaustion that they started to understand something profound. Fighting the world wasn't the answer. Changing the way the world saw them would always be an uphill battle. But changing how they saw themselves, that was within their power. The breakthrough moment came when they were around 16. It was an ordinary afternoon, and the twins were sitting on the steps of their house after a particularly difficult day at school. The dark-skinned twin had just been called a racial slur, while her sister had been dismissed by her classmates as not really black. They sat in silence for a long time, not speaking, just feeling the weight of the world pressing down on them. But then, the pale twin broke the silence. "What if we're not the problem?" she said, her voice quiet but full of realization. "What if the world is the one that needs to change?" Her twin looked at her, the words hitting her like a jolt. For so long, they had carried the belief that they needed to fit in, that they had to prove they were worthy of love, worthiness, and acceptance. But here, in this quiet moment of clarity, her sister had unlocked something profound. The realization that they weren't broken, they weren't flawed, they were simply different, and that difference was their power. This moment sparked a slow but inevitable shift in their mindset. The twins began to see that their struggles weren't personal shortcomings. They were the result of a world that valued conformity over individuality. And that wasn't something they could control, but what they could control was how they responded to it. The moral awakening wasn't instantaneous, it didn't happen overnight, but it began to take root in them, an internal change that gradually freed them from the need to constantly seek validation from others. They started focusing on their strengths, on their dreams, and on their potential. Instead of allowing the world's cruelty to define them, they began defining themselves. The pale twin poured herself into her studies, aiming to become a doctor, someone who could heal others, not just physically but emotionally. She wanted to be a role model for young girls who felt like they didn't belong. The dark-skinned twin found solace in art, expressing her pain, her struggles, and her dreams through vivid drawings. She started to see the beauty in what made her different, in the diversity that she had once been ashamed of. Her art became a mirror of her soul, a soul that was no longer burdened by society's judgment. Their bond grew stronger during this period of moral awakening. They had always been close, but now they shared a deeper understanding. They supported each other not just emotionally, but morally. Whenever one of them faltered, the other would remind them of their worth. Together, they began to challenge the very notion that they needed to change in order to be accepted. But the biggest lesson of all came when they realized that their worth wasn't tied to the acceptance of others. They had intrinsic value, unique, irreplaceable value. And as they embraced this, the world around them began to change. Their internal transformation started to manifest externally. No longer did they care about the opinions of those who mocked them. They walked taller, spoke louder, and carried themselves with confidence. Their awakening wasn't just an emotional change. It was a transformation that was reflected in their actions. They no longer cowered in the face of adversity. They didn't shy away from the challenges that came with their differences. They learned to embrace their identity, knowing that the right people would see them for who they truly were, and not just for the color of their skin or their appearance. Through their journey, they learned the most valuable lesson of all. That the world would not always be kind, but that they didn't need to bend to fit into it. They were strong enough to change their own narrative and redefine their future. This moral awakening was the foundation for the women they would become, the women who would rise above adversity and break through every barrier the world set in their path. They were no longer victims of their circumstances, but empowered individuals capable of changing their own destiny. The emotional climax for the twins came when they were 16 years old, a pivotal moment that tested everything they had learned and everything they had become. It wasn't something that could be prepared for. No amount of mental fortitude could have made them ready for it. Yet, this was the moment that would prove to both of them that they had finally become the women they had always dreamed of being. It happened one late afternoon at their high school. They were sitting outside during lunch, laughing together, sharing stories about their future. The pale twin, who had always been more withdrawn, suddenly opened up about her desire to become a doctor, to heal others just as she longed to heal herself. The dark-skinned twin, who had started creating art as a way to express her inner pain, smiled softly, holding onto her sister's dream like it was her own. But as they sat together, talking about their futures, a group of students walked by. They were the same group who had tormented the twins for years. They hadn't forgotten. The teasing, the mocking, the cruel jokes about their appearances, it was all still there. This time, it was worse. One of the boys, a popular student known for his sharp tongue, called out to them from across the courtyard. "Hey, do you two ever wonder what life would be like if you just looked like everyone else? Maybe then people wouldn't ignore you." The words hung in the air like thick, suffocating smoke. The dark-skinned twin, who had always felt the weight of those kinds of insults the hardest, froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she thought she might crumble. It had been years of this, years of fighting back against the cruel world. And here they were, still facing the same old battle. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. Instead of falling apart, Instead of retreating back into the shell of self-doubt they had once known so well, the twins did something they had never done before. The pale twin, who had long stayed quiet in the background, stood up slowly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "You have no idea what it's like to walk in our shoes, but we're stronger because of it." Her words were calm, but her eyes were burning with a fire the boy had never seen before. The entire group of students fell silent, taken aback by the sheer conviction in her voice. The dark-skinned twin stood up next to her sister, her stance protective, her face a mixture of pride and pain. "You think we haven't heard those words 1,000 times?" she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You think we've spent years being bullied and hated without learning something from it? We've learned to love ourselves, something you'll never understand." The words hit like a punch. The boys who had once made fun of them stood frozen, unsure of how to react. The emotional weight of the moment was palpable. This was no longer about two girls who were ashamed of their differences. This was about two powerful young women who had found their voices and weren't afraid to use them. But it wasn't just the power in their words that was so moving. It was the emotional depth, the years of suffering and heartache that led to this moment. The bullying, the sleepless nights, the longing to belong. And now, here they were, standing taller than they ever had before, united and unbreakable. For the first time, the students who had once made them feel small now saw them differently. The twins were no longer the awkward outcasts. They were strong, confident, and unapologetically themselves. And it was in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the school bell rang, that the twins realized just how far they had come. They weren't the scared, bullied girls who had once thought they weren't enough. They were women with dreams, with purpose, with the strength to face anything that came their way. As they walked away from the courtyard, hand in hand, the air around them felt lighter. The world was still harsh, still full of prejudice and hatred, but it no longer had power over them. They had found something far more important than acceptance. They had found each other, their shared strength, and an unshakable belief in who they were. The emotional moment wasn't just a turning point for them. It was a turning point for everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. In their eyes, the world had shifted. They had learned that the path to empowerment wasn't about making others see them differently. It was about seeing themselves differently and letting that truth shine through. The weight they had carried for so long was lifted. And as they walked toward their future, they knew this moment would forever be a reminder of their journey, their struggles, their triumphs, and the bond that nothing could ever break. The emotional shift had happened not just for them, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. The twins had found their voice, and they were never going to let it go. Throughout their journey, the twins learned that sometimes the greatest sacrifices are the ones that are never spoken about, never acknowledged, and often go unnoticed by others. It was the small, quiet sacrifices that truly shaped who they would become, especially in their darkest moments, when the world seemed to be working against them. The story of their silent sacrifice began in their early teenage years, when they had to face the burden of being different, not only in appearance but in the expectations placed upon them. At home, their family struggled to make ends meet, and despite their parents' efforts, the twins often went without luxuries. But it was not the material things that troubled them most. It was the emotional toll of feeling different. At times, it felt like the weight of the world was crushing their dreams before they could even begin to soar. The older sister, the pale twin, noticed how her darker-skinned twin sister always seemed to bear the brunt of the world's cruelty. The taunts, the stares, the whispers, it all seemed to land on her. Yet every time it did, the pale twin saw how her sister would retreat into herself, carrying the weight of the world silently. It broke her heart every single time, but she knew her sister would never ask for help. One day, when they were 14, the pale twin made a quiet decision that would forever change the course of their lives. She would do whatever it took to give her sister a chance at happiness. It wasn't a grand gesture that others would notice. It wasn't a dramatic act of rebellion or a show of defiance. It was the way she started sacrificing her own dreams for the sake of her sisters. She gave up after-school programs and extra activities she loved, knowing that her sister's self-esteem was fragile and needed the boost of attention, support, and encouragement. Her sister had always wanted to be a dancer, but seeing how self-conscious she was about her skin tone and how the world had bullied her, the pale twin quietly decided to take a step back from her own desires, to make sure that her sister felt enough love and support to pursue hers. Every time they spoke of the future, she would encourage her sister to follow her dreams, even if it meant she would never have the chance to chase her own in the same way. She had silently sacrificed her own ambitions, all for the sake of ensuring that her sister would feel validated, supported, and confident in her journey. But it wasn't just the big sacrifices, the ones people could see, that shaped their story. There were the quiet, everyday moments, when the pale twin would offer up her lunch to her sister, even though she was hungry herself, when she'd stay up late, comforting her sister after yet another encounter with bullying, even though she had to face the same hatred the next day, when she'd quietly support her sister, offering words of encouragement during moments of doubt when no one else was there. And then there was the sacrifice she made when the older twin finally found her path. By that time, the girls had started to find their way in life, with the darker twin gaining confidence in her appearance and abilities. She had become the top student in art, gaining the attention of galleries and scholarship programs. She was on the verge of becoming the artist she'd always dreamed of, but it was at this moment that the pale twin's silent sacrifice became clear. Knowing how much her sister had fought for this opportunity, knowing how hard her sister had worked, to get here, the pale twin made the decision to support her. The darker twin wanted to go abroad for a prestigious art program, but the pale twin didn't have the same financial resources or opportunities. The moment her sister received the acceptance letter, the pale twin knew that her own dreams would have to be put on hold for good, so she quietly worked 2 jobs to fund her sister's education, knowing full well that it meant sacrificing her own happiness. No one ever knew the depth of her sacrifice. The darker twin never knew the amount of emotional weight her sister carried, and it wasn't until later in their journey that the truth came to light. The pale twin had never once complained or voiced her feelings, nor had she ever asked for anything in return. She loved her sister too much to make her feel guilty for achieving her dreams. What the world didn't know was that the pale twin had dreamed of attending an art school of her own to become a painter herself. But the pressure to help her sister, to always put her first, had erased her own desires. The success of her sister's career had become the pale twin's success. Every brushstroke her sister painted was as if she herself was painting. Every gallery exhibition her sister held, she too held in spirit. When the twins finally achieved their individual successes, and their paths began to separate, it was clear how much the pale twins' silent sacrifice had played into their journey. But in the quiet, private moments when they were alone together, their bond was unspoken but deeply understood. The darker twin, now a successful artist, realized the truth about her sister's sacrifice, and it moved her to the core. The pale twin's success came when she helped her sister build an empire, using the connections she had worked so hard to create while sacrificing her own career. As her sister rose to billionaire status, the pale twin worked tirelessly behind the scenes, never seeking recognition or acknowledgement. Her greatest reward was seeing her sister live the life she had always dreamed of. In a quiet moment of reflection, the darker twin looked at her and said, "You've given me everything, and I've never thanked you for it. But now I see you, really see you, for everything you are." It was then that the world understood the silent sacrifice, the strength of a sister's love, the power of putting someone else's dreams before your own, the quiet resilience that fueled a story of triumph and success. It was this silent sacrifice, unnoticed by many, that had given them both the strength to rise from the ashes of their past and claim their place in the world. This powerful element of silent sacrifice was what allowed the twins to achieve their dreams, and it was the cornerstone of their bond, the true test of unconditional love. And it was in this sacrifice that they found their greatest triumph. From a young age, Ava always stood slightly in front of her twin, shielding her without saying a word. Their classmates laughed at the contrast of their skin tones, but Ava's eyes always burned with quiet defiance. No matter how harsh the world became, she made one silent vow: no one would break her sister again. Each time someone mocked Zara for her darker complexion, Ava clenched her fists behind her back. She absorbed the pain like a sponge, determined to never let it reach her sister's heart. When others threw words like knives, Ava threw silence like armor. Teachers dismissed Zara's talent, attributing her brilliance to coincidence, not intelligence. But Ava kept every report card, every sketch, every win, building a wall of proof for the day they'd rise. And in that determination grew a mission, not just to protect, but to prove her sister belonged. At night, while Zara cried quietly under her blanket, Ava sat by the window, wide awake. Her mind ran miles ahead, mapping out scholarships, plans, and backup dreams for both of them. No one would hand them anything, but Ava was ready to take on the world for her sister. In high school, when a group tried to corner Zara in the locker room, Ava stormed in like a storm. She didn't care if she got detention or expelled. Her sister's dignity was worth it. That day. They learned she wasn't just a protective sister. She was a lioness with fire in her chest. Zara never asked for protection. She tried to toughen up, hide her bruises, bite her tears. But Ava saw it all. The trembling hands, the cracked voice, the forced smile. So she walked beside her, never behind, reminding her sister that she never had to face it alone. When college. Letters came and only one had a scholarship. Ava burned hers in silence. She let Zara believe they both chose art school, but she had applied to engineering. She rewrote her future with no regret. Zara's dreams were bigger, and that made Ava fight harder. Years later, when Zara was on the verge of quitting art because of one cruel critic, Ava stepped in. She gathered her sister's scattered paintings and organized a local gallery event on her own. Even without money or support, her determination lit the room with belief, and the critics came back clapping. When Zara became a rising name, Ava still managed her schedules, booked her flights, answered her hate mail. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't rest, while even one shadow threatened her sister's light. That protectiveness wasn't a burden. It was Ava's heartbeat, and when Zara faced her biggest decision, whether to accept $1 billion investment or stay true to her roots, Ava stood firm, whispering, "Don't sell what you built from your pain just for comfort, own it." It wasn't just protection anymore. It was belief in her sister's strength, forged in fire and grace. Ava's determination wasn't loud or attention-seeking. It was steady, like the pulse in Zara's career, like the spine in her courage. Behind. Every spotlight Zara stood in, Ava stood just behind, the reason she never fell. Zara stood on the balcony of her glass office tower, watching the world below move without her. The headlines screamed her success, youngest Black CEO in tech history. But inside, a hollow ache grew, because in the rush toward glory, she had lost sight of the one person who built her wings. She remembered Ava's quiet hands packing Zara's art supplies at 2 a.m. when she was too tired to move. How Ava skipped meals so Zara could have enough for printing her first portfolio. But now, Zara couldn't even recall the last time she asked Ava how she was doing. The redemption began not in words, but in action. Zara paused a global launch to create an art foundation in Ava's name. Not to show off, but to give back the dreams Ava buried for her sake. She turned down a major investor who mocked their past as good PR material. Zara stood up, pushed her chair back, and walked away from the deal, fire in her voice. "My sister didn't suffer for your sympathy. She sacrificed for something greater." She launched a campaign called Invisible Hands, spotlighting people behind famous names. It wasn't just a tribute. It was an apology wrapped in action, respect, and love, and it caught fire. The world started asking, "Where is Ava?" When Ava saw the campaign on a dusty TV in a small-town library where she taught underprivileged kids, her eyes welled up, not from fame, but from feeling seen, truly seen. For the first time, Zara hadn't spoken for her, but about her, with truth and reverence. Ava didn't respond immediately. She watched for months, making sure this change wasn't performative. Until one day, Zara's driver found a small envelope on the office desk with a note. "I saw what you built. Let's rebuild us." When they finally stood face to face again, there were no grand speeches, just tear-filled eyes, a trembling hug, and a whispered, "I'm so sorry." Ava didn't need explanations. She needed consistency. And this time, Zara was ready to give. Their redemption wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about honoring it, learning from it, and choosing each other again, without pride in the way. Because forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering who fought for you when you forgot yourself. The press was buzzing about Zara's sudden disappearance just days before her next billion-dollar pitch. No one knew where the famous CEO had gone. Investors panicked, rumors swirled. But Zara wasn't lost. She was on a mission that had nothing to do with money. She walked into the dusty community center in Georgia wearing jeans and no makeup. The receptionist didn't recognize her. Why would she? Zara wasn't there to be seen. She was there for a little girl named Keisha, drawing under a broken ceiling fan. Keisha had Ava's eyes. That same spark of quiet rebellion and untapped potential. Zara watched as Ava coached the kids with nothing but passion, patience, and a borrowed whiteboard. Tears welled in her eyes. This was the real empire Ava had been building in silence. Suddenly, a tremor of panic hit. What if Ava refused to speak to her? What if she walked away again, in front of these children, in front of the dream she built? But Zara had come, too far to hide behind fear now. She waited until the class ended. Ava saw her from across the room, and for a long moment, nothing moved. Just two sisters staring at 1,000 unspoken things between them. Then Ava walked up, her arms folded, guarded, but not angry. "I saw your face on the magazine," she said, voice soft but steady. Zara smiled sadly. "It doesn't matter anymore. This is the only place I wanted to be seen." They sat in the back of the center, knees brushing like when they were little girls under the same blanket. Zara pulled out a folder. Not contracts, but blueprints. A new branch. Not mine, ours. Funded by me. Led by you. For every kid like us. Ava hesitated, hands trembling. "What if I fail?" Zara shook her head, eyes burning. "You're the only reason I ever succeeded." That moment, simple, quiet, was the loudest echo of inspiration they'd ever shared. Back in New York, the boardroom waited. Zara arrived late, but she wasn't alone. Ava walked in beside her, clipboard in hand, fierce and focused. Whispers rippled through the room. The forgotten twin had returned, and this time she had the mic. Zara stood before the crowd, pointed to Ava, and said, "This woman taught me how to lead long before I built anything. If you want my future, she's part of it." A silence followed. Then, applause, real, roaring, thunderous applause. The media called it the Twin Revolution. But to Ava and Zara, it was just a return home. They didn't just rewrite their story, they rewrote what sisterhood, resilience, and redemption looked like. Months passed since the twins reunited in that dusty classroom, yet the world hadn't stopped talking. From headlines to hashtags, Ava and Zara's journey became a symbol of overcoming judgment, of rewriting fate. But beneath all the noise, something more powerful had bloomed. Peace. Zara finally stepped away from the pressure of perfection. She stopped chasing numbers, no longer needing to prove her worth through boardroom wins. For the first time, she felt loved for who she was, not what she earned. Ava, once the quiet twin, the shadow, was now a guiding light for thousands. Her community schools expanded, funded fully by Zara, but directed entirely by her. She taught not just lessons, but courage, showing kids how to bloom in the cracks. One morning, Zara stood by a lake where their mother once brought them as kids. Ava joined her silently, holding 2 cups of coffee, like old times. They watched the sunrise break through the mist, soft, gentle, unannounced. "We made it," Zara whispered, her voice trembling. "Not alone," Ava replied, bumping her shoulder. "We carried each other." That simple truth was the heartbeat of their journey. Healing didn't happen in isolation. Ava got a letter weeks later from one of the bullied children she once taught. The girl had become a public speaker, traveling schools and spreading Ava's message: "Your difference is your destiny." The girl ended her letter with, "You didn't just teach me, you saved me." Zara was offered a global award for entrepreneurship, but asked to share it with Ava. Together on stage, they told their story, raw and unfiltered, not for applause, but to inspire. People didn't see a billionaire and her sister. They saw 2 warriors who never stopped believing. Their story inspired a global initiative, the Different Colors Project. It paired successful professionals with underprivileged youth, focusing on those once bullied or silenced. Each pairing, a spark. Each success, a rebellion against stereotypes. Ava married a local artist who painted murals in every school she opened. Zara adopted a child from a background like theirs. Abandoned, overlooked, misunderstood. They built not just businesses, but families grounded in love and second chances. The sisters published a book together, More Than Skin Deep. It became a bestseller not for fame, but because it spoke to millions who felt not enough. Each chapter was a mirror for someone else's silent battles, and a promise they weren't alone. On the 10th anniversary of their public reunion, they hosted a global summit for change. Thousands gathered, teachers, students, activists, and yes, twins from all over the world. Every corner of the event echoed with one message: your difference is your power. As the event closed, Zara looked at Ava and whispered, "We used to beg for acceptance. Now we're building the future." Ava smiled, tears in her eyes. "And no child will have to hide again." From the cold silence of being laughed at in hallways to standing on stages with crowds cheering for their truth, the journey had come full circle, and it was paved with scars, strength, and love. The world now knew their names, not for their looks, but for their fire, their grace, and the hope they gifted others. Ava and Zara were no longer defined by difference, but by the legacy they chose. Their past wasn't erased. It was honored. Their pain wasn't forgotten. It was transformed. Their story wasn't rare anymore. It was a spark lighting thousands more. And in the quiet of their home, when the lights faded and cameras left, 2 sisters sat by the fireplace, sharing laughter and late-night tea.